Well, it was a hot day here in the foothills of the Sierra Mountains. The whole world's on fire, really, though. It's hard to find sources of hope. I mean, I've been reading this book by Charles Mann, 1491, New Revelations of the Americas Before Columbus. And he's basically chronicling all the research that's been done in the last couple of decades that totally rewrites the version of history we learned in high school, which was that this wasn't a very populated hemisphere when Europeans first arrived here in the late 15th century, and that it was our European people's superior technology and religion and culture that just um, allowed them to take over North and South America. But what Charles Mann is chronicling is this research showing that, in fact, this was a very populated, highly populated hemisphere. There were upwards of 50 million people here pre contact. And these people arrived not, 10 to 12,000 years ago, as was thought for much of the 20th century, but they arrived here as early as 50,000 and perhaps at least like 30,000 years ago. And there's evidence of advanced civilizations in the Amazonian rainforest and the mouth of the Amazon River, going back, you know, 6,000 years ago already, and in Peru, going back even longer. So, you know, the Mayans and others invented complex astronomical theory and mathematics, calendar systems. The numeral zero and its mathematical function was sort of co-discovered in India and in Mesoamerica around the same time. And, monumental architecture is all over southern Mexico and Central America and in the Amazon. It's just covered in vegetation, and we're only recently discovering all of this. And so the reality seems to be, based on this latest archaeological evidence, that tens of millions of people were living here. They had advanced civilizations. And when Europeans first arrived here, these populations were decimated by disease. Europeans live with domesticated animals and had more battle scarred and battle wise immune systems. They'd been doing battle with viruses and bacteria that, were being exchanged with their domesticated animals for hundreds and hundreds, thousands of years. Native Americans did not domesticate animals in the same way. They weren't living under roofs, farm roofs, with their own animals. They domesticated animals in a different way. Another myth that Charles Mann dispels by looking at all this research is that somehow Native Americans lived lightly on the land and were sort of conservationists, natural conservationists. They didn't interfere in the wildness of their environment. They just let it be and they lived within it. But in fact, they were really cultivating it to such an extent that the Amazon rainforest itself may be artificial, cultivated by its human inhabitants thousands of years ago. North America, when the first Europeans arrived here, it was described, the Northeast, the forests in the Northeast were described as like parks because there was a fire management system that Native Americans were putting in place that cleared the brush, and that they were cultivating the forests, planting fruit and nut trees, for many, many, many generations. And their agriculture just took a different form than European agriculture. And what wiped out 90% of the population of this hemisphere within the course of a century post-contact was disease. European conquerors did not rapidly take control of this hemisphere of North and South America because of superior technology or superior culture. They took control because all across the land, in waves, even before colonists made arrive physically in a new community, the diseases, because there were many trade routes and the natives were speaking to each other. So Columbus lands, he unloads his pigs, and these waves of smallpox and other diseases, influenza, radiate through the New World and are carried from village to village over the course of the next century and a half or so, and longer. These epidemics kept happening within different native communities for hundreds of years, and because they didn't live among domesticated animals in the way that the Europeans had, their immune systems weren't prepared for the onslaught, and 90%, the estimate is, died in the course of a century. The population declined by 90% in the course of a century. So, a Holocaust, yes. Not caused by some unique evil in the white European. Just, it's not that the Europeans were angels. They were here to conquer and steal whatever they could. But it was disease that allowed them to take over this land, because it's not as though the Native Americans were not the creators of complex, diverse societies, with complex economies, spiritualities, philosophies, sciences. So I'm reading this book about the role that disease played, and in the midst of this pandemic, trying to make sense of how our world today is to move forward. And we're not in the same situation, but we're in a similar situation. We are a civilization facing ecological limitation, whether disease or environmental or some other kind. The difference now, though, is that we're global. We're global. It's not just the Yucatan Peninsula and the Mayan civilization collapses. Like, wow, how did that happen so fast? What a tragedy! It's not just an individual local society. We are, for better or worse, for better and for worse, a planetary people. Our fate, is part of woven into a single garment of destiny, I think is how Martin Luther King Jr. put it, right? So what's different about our situation is that if we do royally fuck this crisis up, then we're risking everything. We're risking not just one civilization, but human civilization as such. And there's never been an apocalypse this planetary for humans. I mean, there have been mass extinctions before, and asteroid impacts and all sorts of things in the evolutionary history of the Earth. But for human beings, like, okay, there was an apocalypse after the Ice Age, and that's when we begin what we call nowadays the historical period, right? Agriculture emerges, and writing and complex hierarchical civilizations, and then the Industrial Revolution and the Information Revolution, and here we are. This is recent as a result of a tremendous climactic transformation. We move out of an ice age and into Holocene, and it's a warmer period, an interglacial period. We seem to be, because of our agricultural and industrial activity, warming the climate, delaying the onset of the next ice age. But whatever we're doing, it has to be put into the same category in terms of its geological impact as an asteroid or a supervolcano eruption or a mass extinction. Human activity we are a geological force. And the world is really burning right now. It's on fire, and I don't know how else to move forward and what other beacon to obey than beauty. And so even if all we can do is build the funeral pyre for this civilization, I would hope that the work that we're doing and the play that we're doing can contribute to the beauty of the world as it burns. Because this celebration of existence is very old, and it's very big. And this planet, as big as it is for us, is not the whole of it. And whatever we are, as cosmic beings, we're made of atoms that were produced in the deaths of stars, and our energy will continue in some form. The whole of evolution is a process of reincarnation, right? I don't think Darwinian biology gives us the whole picture of what this reincarnational evolution is like. It gives us part of the picture, but we need a grander story. We need a new story to make sense of our situation right now. And I think the old world, the old system must die, and it's dying, and it's going to be painful for all of us. I think our attention now needs to be focused on how we preserve and pass through the coming bottleneck. Preserve what culture we can, and find ways to persevere on a local level in order to survive the inevitable collapse. So build the funeral pyre to bring more beauty into the world as it burns is not to say to rush to collapse the thing. It's not. This isn't an accelerationist manifesto. I'm just saying build the funeral pyre as in, like, it's going to collapse. Let's try to soften the blow. Let's try to lift up what we can, even if the only way we can lift it is by burning it and allowing its ashes to rise into the sky, so that we can clear the space for something new. There could be that there's no transition from the peak of our industrial civilization to the peak of, we hope, some future ecological civilization or way of life, if not civilization, so-called. It could be that we need to go through the decline, that we need to hit the bottom before we can rebuild something better. Yeah, beauty is my beacon at this point, and thank you for whatever ways that you're trying to bring more beauty into the world.